Hey, Eric from Whorticulture. I'm going to take you guys into the mix from within without. So let's go. Okay, so let's talk about organization. It's really important to organize it before you even start, because if not, you have a bunch of random tracks everywhere. Your mind wants to put things into buckets so you can go through and organize it and mix it. You'll notice that there's color coordination. I'm pretty I go crazy with color coordination, because when you see all this information at you, it's like, what am I looking at? Like, I got, a million things coming at me. So that's why we always put these colors so I know exactly what I'm looking at without having to struggle too hard. So more often than not, a good mix is kind of started by good pre-production and getting sounds right. So a lot of that is sculpting and enhancing. What's the thing that you hear most in a song, especially a club song? You hear vocals and you hear the kick drum and the snare. So those are the three elements of a mix, the three corners that you really have to solidify. So what I did was we started with the kick drum, and that's this one right here. It's awesome. So before we even got into that, kind of sounds like this, but I decided on the best kick drum, and finding out what the kick drum is a huge battle. And you see on my EQ here, I'm not doing a ton of EQ on the kick drum, and not a lot of dynamics. So the sound, you want it to be right before you even start EQing it. So that's all we're doing with the kick drum, just a little bit of that presence there. Transient designer, which makes it puts more of the click and thack going through. And then the L2, this is just a compressor limiter, so that just brings the low end, the low parts up. And that's kind of like where you start, kick and snare. Snare, for instance, in this also, if we're going to go to our snare, see, here's our two snare drums. These are not color coordinated because I probably was lazy. But do as I say, not as I do. And for our snare, it started here. Okay. That's good, but we also wanted that almost very industrial sounding, like steam, So we used a white noise snare drum, which essentially is just white noise, which is a kind of a synthesis term for this sound. So we use that. We just use that right here. That's it, just in the snare drum. Now the secret is to EQ it and find the resonant frequencies. Without the resonant frequencies, it would sound like this. It sounds like your TV is going off, like you're losing your TV. God, I don't even know, like, who some of the kids of the 80s understand, like, that sound. So with the EQ, really focuses it, and then add some distortion. And look, that's a ton of distortion I'm adding right there. That's 100% distortion. And now it sounds awesome with the two. Hold on. Sweet. And then just snare drums just go through a little bit of compression. Let's talk about vocals. So vocals are obviously the most important thing of any song, especially for what we're doing. So what do? Ignore them and make the music more important. Just joking. we don't do that. So we start with vocals in the same way you get a raw piece of slab, right? And you have to really start to shape it. And for instance, let's see. So with vocals, we kind of started here. This is Nico's vocals that recorded like right behind me. And you'll notice that they have all these different colors. That means I went through line by line. I went through literally line by line and found the best take out of those takes that he did. Line by line, it's tedious, but that's what you need to do if you want pristine results. So, started there, and then we went to tone shaping. But before, this is what the vocals sound like, just kind of raw.
We brace for impact as we're waiting for the storm.
So that's very, there's not a lot of excitement, right? It's very mid-rangey and it's captured well. It's a good microphone, but you still have to do a lot to it.
Impending dark on the horizon.
Okay, so what we did was EQ, EQ, de-essing, more EQ, compression, EQ, another compressor, another EQ, and then a multiband compressor. And what we get from that is this.
We brace for impact as we're waiting for the storm.
What that does is it brightens the vocal up enough to lift it to where it's in front of our faces, and we can, it's the most important thing. And it's very shiny, and we want that, we want it to feel like he's right here, right? So that's how we get the tone. So let's say we get our tone figured out of the vocal. It's very, we got our tone. Now let's talk about the space we want to put it in. Like, where is he singing? I always like to think of like, there's a stage, right? You go to a show, and I like to visualize the surroundings of that show and where he is. So the effects we used were a reverb, another reverb, a delay, another delay, and a widener. So basically how this works is just the reverb, that the first one you use, which is a plate, which is kind of an old, one of the first reverbs that existed. So
we brace for impact as we're waiting for the storm.
So when you think about what kind of space you want this to fill, you aren't thinking as much heady as you are emotionally too. So we used kind of the approach of a very almost retro, like Enigma, this band Enigma. We wanted this kind of retro, almost plasticky reverb on these, something that was almost sci-fi in a way.
We brace for impact as we're waiting.
So we start
for the
with the Vox plate, and the Vox plate looks like this. It's a digital reverb. It's a very famous digital reverb that we used, and always with reverbs you EQ them after. So and then we used another reverb on top of that.
Impending dark on the horizon.
And this is kind of a reverse
we face a fate
plate.
With no more choices to
so that
explore.
reverb by itself kind of look like this.
We are to blame, we are to blame.
Oops. And I'm going to exaggerate it.
We brace for impact as we're waiting for the storm.
See how it's kind of like a reverse, but with those together,
brace for impact as we're waiting for the storm.
Then we add a delay. Delay puts things a little even, those gel the track even more. So
impending dark on the horizon.
Okay. And then another delay and a widener that makes the vocals wider and more chorusy.
We face a fate with no more choices to explore. We are to blame.
And with it,
We
with the
are
track.
to blame. We brace for impact as we're waiting for the storm.
Yeah, so that's pretty much how that works. So yeah, let's talk about the synth layers. So there's some sonic information missing from the original Hero synth, which is still in this session. It didn't have enough mid-range to it. When I talk about mid-range, I mean like the meaty middle of the sonic spectrum. And I wanted to use real analog for it and play the actual synthesizer. So this is that synth. Notice how it's occupying more of a mid-range frequency, but when we put them both together, here's without it. See how the mid-range just kind of comes back, the Hero synth? And what I did was I went through the pass and just pretty much just turned the knobs. This particular synth is a Juno 106. It's like a pretty prevalent 80s synthesizer, but here I'm opening up the cutoff, playing along to the song to add excitement on movement of that, like a real person doing it. And then this is one of the other layers. That's the really high-end, wide part of the synth, the Hero synth. Without it, mixing is all about subtlety, subtle changes. So that took the synth and made it sound huge. And then there's 4 Hero synth layers. Here's the last one. Almost like a bassiness on that one. My God, I hate this. This little thing in Pro Tools makes you want to gouge your eyes out. So there's a relationship. Here's without. It just adds a little bit of a low end. So you think of like the synth in 3 compartments. You know, you have your stereo on your car. You usually have a low, a mid, and a high in your car. So what we're doing with elements just like this is we're saying this one is for the high part, this one is for the mids, and this is for like the lows. And you treat this synth just like that. Digital things sometimes don't sound good. They're too clean. It's too pristine. It sounds too good. So what we end up having to do is dirty them up. And for instance, on the bass is a good example of this. Here's the bass, the whole bass part. Okay, which is all good. But what we ended up having to do is put it through what's called a tube saturation unit. So these are really awesome. It's tubes are just really so this is a tube distortion unit, but back in the day tubes were the be-all end-all. Now most consumer electronics don't have tubes anymore. Here's what the bass sounds like without tube distortion, and this is just a little bit, by the way, so there's not a ton of distortion happening. Here's with the tube distortion unit. All of a sudden, it brings it to life. It's just harmonics. It's just one little thing. Without it again? All of a sudden, all the low-end information comes back. We're driving it. We're adding grit and harmonics. Here is what I call a chorus block. It's a block of a bunch of vocals together. So a lot of times it's not so easy to be like one vocal and it's done, right? We have our main, which is usually the main top line. It's the best take, and then we have these doubles, and the doubles accentuate that.
We can't live without. We can't live without.
So let's listen to it.
We can't live within.
Here's without the doubles.
We can't live without. We can't live within. We can't live without.
So there's the doubles. So there's three mainline vocals happening there, right? Then we add harmonies on top of that, and the harmonies sound like this.
We can't live within. We can't live without. We can't live within. We can't live without.
So there's the harmony layers. So now we have a wall of sound. Notice these are panned hard left and hard right for these harmonies, and our mains are panned to the center. Okay, and our harmonies are coming here, and this is our vocal chain for that. And those go to a background bus as well. So here's an example of another chorus, but this time we're bringing it down low.
We can't live within. We can't live without.
Here's the intimate.
We can't live within.
Sounds a little bit different too.
We can't live without.
Softer,
We can't
a little bit more affected, not so bright, because again, we wanted to build to something.
without. We can't live within.
Here's the build.
We can't live without.
Okay. And then there's some other layers here that are, these are my harmonies.
We are to blame.
Those are distorted We Are to Blames.
We are to blame.
Here's the main.
We are to blame.
Adding a bunch of distortion and compression with the main line. It sounds like this. Let's just do that. These all together.
We are to blame. We are to blame.
Very subtle, very subtle things, but they do make the difference. Hope you enjoyed this little insight into the mixing and making of Within Without. It's not super in depth, but I hope you guys got a little bit out of this. If you want to see more, or you want to see more in-depth videos, drop us a line and we'll see if we can do that for you. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. This is Eric from Whorticulture, and I'll see you guys next time.
We can't live within. We can't live without. We can't live within.